Hello and welcome. I'm Ann Hess. The Pork Checkoff is building a bigger appetite for U.S. pork by driving demand both domestically and internationally. Joining us to discuss the latest momentum and upcoming initiatives is Dr. David Newman, Senior Vice President of Market Growth for the National Pork Board. Welcome, Dr. Newman, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to remind the audience tuning in, you can post your questions at any time there in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So, David, the last time we talked about how the Pork Checkoff is working to drive demand here at home, but that's, only half the battle. What's the Pork Checkoff doing to move that needle internationally?
Sure, and it's a very good question, and we've been talking a lot about domestic marketing efforts over the last year, or a couple of years especially, but certainly for the U.S. pork industry and the pork producers, the international market space has been critically important for a very long time. Over the last 25 years, we've seen that grow exponentially today to where we have nearly 30% of our production is sold internationally through a variety of different products in every corner of the earth. So at the National Pork Board, we use our largest partner. One of our largest partners is the U.S. Meat Export Federation. And so partnering with them, we're able to use matching funds with USDA through a program called the Market Access Program, or MAP funds, where we are actually able to leverage producer dollars in nearly a one-to-one match in the investment to help drive demand internationally for customers all over the world. So that is focusing on things like emerging markets, highlighting new cuts for customers that may not have been previously tried. A good example of that is a lot of markets where you are seeing a more economically suppressed population, as an example, trend to start out in products like offals. So as they start to emerge and their economies emerge, they actually start to get into more middle meats, things that we're used to in the U.S., like loins or bellies or hams. So we work a lot with our trading partner of USMEF on that. And then also just showcasing what makes U.S. pork different or a cut above our competitors. And all of those things help illustrate just how critically important that market access diversification really is for our farmers.
So what would you say is step number one? Is it building new partnerships with some countries or regions?
Yeah, well, it's always about building new customers. And so if we think about some of our largest customers of U.S. pork, let's focus in on two very important ones, Mexico and Japan. So let's use Japan as our first example. We're excited about new partnerships there. It's one of the longest, most mature markets that we've had over the past 25 years. It's worth a tremendous amount of value to the U.S. producer. So being able to capitalize on fresh pork, also on other items like ground seasoned pork, is very important to the Japanese consumer. And so doing that, along with telling our story about production. And when I say telling our story, I mean producers sharing their sustainability story directly with Japanese buyers, because these things are top of mind for those consumers, is very important. And a great example of that over the last year has been partnerships with large food service companies. There is a very popular product in Japan called tonkatsu. One of those restaurant chains that USMEF partnered with switched to 100% U.S. pork. And why this is a big deal, as an example, is in that one market, we're talking about the consumption of a little over 1.2 million pounds of loins a month into that business of U.S. pork. So there's always a lot of work to do in not only the emerging markets, but the mature markets as well, because this is really about both value and volume of product coming out of the United States.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that more after, speaking of new partnerships and making new friends, but also keeping those old friendships and those long-term buyers. Are we trying to expand sales there as well?
Sure. We're trying to expand sales all over the world. And with U.S. Meat Export Federation, they have a touch point to all corners of the earth, to be fair, where people are consuming pork. And just to give you a little bit of a highlight around exports and what we're talking about now is the March pork export report that recently came out talked about value per head at around $70.85. So that's up 12% from a year ago, and that is the highest in 3 years, than the fifth highest on record. That's great news for farmers. So showing that we're actually, by diversifying and being able to move all these parts of the carcass into different parts of the world based on a variety of things like culture, market access, those type of things are really, really good for us here at home, where some of those products that we're not consuming domestically. Another great example of talking about how we're expanding sales to consumer, to these buyers, is what's happening in Mexico. Mexico is our #1 trading partner of U.S. pork. The last year has been a fantastic market there. And the primary sales in Mexico have been driven by hams over the last 20 years. Now, as Mexico is becoming an emerging market, they're expanding beyond hams into really important items like loins. And so USMEF actually called 2023 the year of the loin, and 2024 continues to be a very strong focus on loins into food service. So it's about, again, driving value beyond just price in the market with all using those strategic partners.
So what's next on Pork Checkoff's agenda as you try to reach international consumers for US pork? Is it, like you said, is it certain cuts? Is it culture? Is it different, food service versus retail?
Sure. Well, it's all of those things, Ian. Certainly, it's about working with food service. It is about partnering with retailers in different parts of the world. One really great thing about the United States, and one really great thing, is our geographical location to the world and our ability to ship fresh, food safe pork from each side of the country to markets all over the world, especially when we think about our ability to not only ship frozen product, but to ship fresh, is crucially important to our international customers. So when we think about those customers, as an example, there's more customers in Asia who are looking for a steady supply of fresh pork. We've seen an interest in U.S. pork with our Mexican buyers. I mentioned that a moment ago. We cannot underestimate the crucial importance of the Mexico market, and we continue doing market activations there in 2024, and we'll be planning those out into 2025 as well. And so, something else that's just really important to point out is that as we're seeing a decline in European production overall, Europe has been a massive exporter of pork to many parts of the world. And as we see their production numbers start to come down, the United States is actually gaining some market share in key areas. So thinking about Oceania as an example, so that's going to include countries like Australia, where in Q1 of this year, those markets expanded by 151% from a year ago. So over $100 million in value, and most of that pork that's entering that is raw material for further processing. Also, other crucial markets like South Korea. South Korea is up 54% from a year ago, over $200 million in value. So there's a lot of possibilities out here for U.S. pork, especially as we see the dynamics changing. What's happening in Europe is being driven by a variety of things, including African swine fever and the impact that that has actually put on their market. And so doing that allows us an opportunity to talk about the expansion and our ability that we have to get into new markets and expand the opportunity for U.S. producers.
Yeah, definitely finding some opportunity there within their challenges, but opening up some new doors for us, it sounds like.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that what else is important in this conversation, if we talk about the opportunity for checkoff and for producers, is no one is better positioned than the U.S. business to deliver high quality, fresh pork around the world. We have been not only a least cost leader in many cases, and even as we start to see the global dynamics change there, we are the leader when we think about fresh, safe product. So checkoff dollars are being put to work to ensure buyers that they are all lined up to purchase products. And again, the example is also on emerging markets rather, is our partnership with USMEF on recently there is a new program put out by USDA called RAP funding. And that's actually talking about what are other regions of the world, if we're looking visionary at 5, 10, 20 years down the road, will be there. Countries like Africa need to be explored and understood in terms of what is the market access going to be, not only for potentially offals or byproducts, but then eventually into fresh meats, much like the conversion of what we've seen in that Mexico market.
Any other key takeaways for producers at home?
Well, I just think that it's really important, and we invite the producers out there or customers or anyone listening to this message that we invite you to keep tabs on the checkoff investment. That's very important, and see what we're doing every day on the behalf of producers in the U.S. with their checkoff investment. You can do that by viewing our monthly export totals on the checkoff website. You can actually go to porkcheckoff.org. It's a simple website, and you can go under the markets tab and see what's there. And then I would probably just also say that, remember, this is about both attacking the markets from both a domestic opportunity and an international opportunity. And there is a great future laid out in front of the U.S. pork business when we think globally about what's going to happen next.
Dr. David Newman, National Pork Board, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss how the Pork Checkoff is building that bigger appetite for U.S. pork.
Yeah, thank you for having me in. Appreciate it.
For more information, as Dr. Newman mentioned, you can visit porkcheckoff.org. For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in today.